My name is Barbara Dumetz, and I'm a professional photographer. I was introduced to photography by my grandfather. He was a photographer in Charleston, West Virginia. And I would watch him take photographs when he'd come to Detroit to visit us, and when we would go to West Virginia to visit them. He was always with his camera and taking pictures, and I just was enamored by that, and I'd be right up under him all the time. I got my first camera from my father. My grandfather had died when I was 14, so I hadn't started taking pictures until much later. My father sent me a camera for a gift while I was in college at Fisk University in Nashville, and it was one of those small Instamatics that has a little cube on the top that had the flash cube that turned around. That was my first camera. I went to Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee from mid-60s, and then I went to Art Center College of Design out in California from 71 to 73. This exhibition here at Art Center College of Design with 30 of my images is basically to tell the story of what I was able to accomplish as an African-American woman, as a photographer in the 70s, and up into the present, of my ability to sustain a commercial photography business in a time when that was kind of unheard of. Obviously, my style and the way I did things is important, but mainly is to tell the story of how I was able to do what I did for the last 40 years. So when people see these images that are behind me and in this exhibition, it's mostly for them to be inspired, so that if they have something that they're doing, if they are in a profession or in any kind of art world where they feel like it's too hard to do, they can look at me and say, well, if she did it, I can do it. I was involved with photography in Fisk because that's where my father had sent me the camera, my first camera. So from that point on, I would take my little Instamatic and shoot the pictures of the sororities, fraternities, doing their steps on the yard, as we used to call it. And I would take pictures of my friends in the dorm. And one time I went and actually photographed Thelonious Monk at a concert with that little camera. That's too funny. Every time I think about that. There was a concert, and I was going to the concert for the yearbook. So I was taking pictures with that little camera, and Arthur Prysock was on that show, and Thelonious Monk. I don't know how they put those two together, but maybe there was others. Oh, maybe it was Roland Kirk too. Anyway, that's what I did with photography in Nashville. I didn't come to Art Center directly from Fisk. I actually moved to Atlanta. When I left Fisk, I moved to New York to work in a department store as a buyer's training program. We were to go to the advertising and copyright department as part of the training to see how the clothes and the products were advertised and set out in the newspaper. And that was when I really realized that I liked the advertising business and the photography business, because we went on a photo shoot. And that really was like, got my eyes big. And I'm like, I want to be in this department. That didn't happen because we weren't really being trained in that department. They just wanted us to know what the process was. So from there, I left that job, went to work at Harlem Hospital for a short period of time, was not happy there, and was having these conversations with my parents, and my dad said, well, maybe you need to go back to grad school or something. So I ended up in Atlanta at what was called Atlanta University at that time, in a graduate program in guidance and counseling. And stayed there for about 6 months. I wanted to move again. I still wasn't happy with Atlanta. I still hadn't really quite figured out what I wanted to do with my life. So while I was in Atlanta, my cousin was graduating from Morehouse, so our families came down for the graduation, And that's when I informed them that I wanted to move again, and I didn't really particularly like the guidance and counseling program, and I didn't think it was for me. And my aunt said, well, why do you keep moving? You've already been to New York, and now you're here, now you want to go to LA. And she talked to me and asked me a series of questions, which ended up with me saying, well, I like pictures, because she asked me what I like to do. And I said, well, I like taking photographs. So she said, well, you should become a photographer, because that's what your grandfather was. And he made a great living and put your father and I through college, and we had a very nice life. And I think you'd be good at it if that's what you want to do. So she said, I see a young lady at Payne College taking the photographs at the football games, and she does, a lot of the stuff for the school newspaper. So yeah, you could be a photographer. So with that said, I went on and pursued how could I do that out in California. So I went and researched art schools, and the friend that I had met while I was there was from California, and he said, if you're going to go to art school, you have to go to Art Center College of Design. They will really train you how to be a great photographer and do ads, and it's just a fabulous school. So I said, oh, okay. So I went and researched it, put my portfolio together. He helped me put the portfolio together. I think I had, by then, I may have had a 35 millimeter by then. I'm a Minolta, I think maybe that's what it was. So I went out and took pictures, and he kind of said, well, take this, this would be good. They'd like that. We went to Piedmont Park, and somebody had left a soup can upside down that was open. And he said, take that, that's like that Andy Warhol stuff, So I took that picture, and, then we bought some food and did a couple of food shots on the picnic table, and which I shot my friends' little kids at the zoo. So I had a variety of photos, and they were all in black and white. And sent that off with my bio, and I got in. Being at Art Center, having really no formal photography training prior to going there was like a big deal. I mean, I learned everything there. How to process film, lighting, different camera styles, 35 millimeter. We had to use 4x5 cameras, and learned how to shoot everything, learned how to print, print color as well as black and white. Learned all about working with art directors and graphic designers. I literally learned everything I know about photography from being at Art Center College of Design, because like I said, I had no previous training. It was just me shooting with my Instamatic and my 35 millimeter. And as far as how it affected my career, it affected it greatly, because Art Center was about working in your profession, not just being an artist. So the kinds of classes and the kinds of teachers that we had were all, the teachers were all working photographers and graphics people and art directors. So we had all the information we needed to go out and do and have a full-on career in photography. When I first got out of school, in order to get consistent work, I did headshots for a lot of the actors and actresses and models that were in LA at the time, that were also, making their way, having their careers. So that helped a lot. At that time, I charged them $75 for, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 shots, and we would find locations to shoot, and they would give me my little $37.50 up front. And once they got their 4 prints, they would pay me the balance. And back then, if you did, 3 or 4 of those a week, you had your rent. So I shot those to get when I first began. Because I wasn't always getting the assignments from the magazines and the agencies. They would just come sparsely, and they weren't coming that fast in the beginning, because I wasn't experienced yet. So those were some of the things I did. And I would shoot some events. That was never my favorite thing to do, to go to an event and shoot for public relations, but I did those. I worked as a clerk at a department store in the Broadway. I had a little part-time job doing that. I also taught photography class at night school, adult school, I guess is what they called it. But mostly I would shoot, headshots and things of that nature. Small independent companies would need photographs for their, their store or whatever little ad they were putting together. So those were the days where I didn't always have an assistant, and I can remember one job I messed up so bad. I didn't know the lighting really well. I didn't light it well, and I needed somebody to have helped me, and I messed that job up so bad. I learned never to take something that was over your head at that time. If you weren't ready, don't take the job. Don't even go ask for it. Yeah, there were always some times when it was slow. Yeah, I mean, the work didn't just come in every day, every week. I'd have to go out there and figure out how to make some work. That's how, I would either, that's where the headshot thing came in. I would go and promote myself as a photographer to do headshots, or it was just a constant, getting on the phone and calling small companies. Back then you had these large books that you could buy that were directories of people who bought photography. So I would go through those books and call everybody and tell them who I was and can I bring my portfolio. And so every day I did something towards getting work when I wasn't doing my little part-time jobs. I considered myself a professional photographer pretty much while I was in school, but for sure the moment I finished, I was out taking my portfolio to ad agencies and magazines and graphic designers, whoever hired photographers, I was taking my portfolio to those people to get work. So I always considered myself a professional photographer. And the other thing that wasn't available to me, well, I shouldn't say wasn't available, but didn't happen for me was that I wasn't able to assist. I think the photographers that I went to go see about assisting, they just didn't think girls could assist. That was back then when there weren't very many women photographers, and they would think, well, and the equipment was much heavier too. The strobe packs, the cameras, everything was much heavier. So I never was chosen to be an assistant for anybody. So I just had to do it myself and hire my own assistants. And in the beginning, I actually did all the work myself, which, I learned very soon after that to hire assistants. And because of the era that I started my photography business was the era of black ad agencies, and it was right after, it was in the early 70s, so a lot of things were opening up for African Americans to own their own businesses, and advertising and public relations and new magazines were being brought on the scene. Prior to the late 60s, early 70s, there weren't a lot of black magazines except for Ebony and Jet, and a few others, Crisis, and a few others. I can't call them off right now. Those magazines were all in New York, and I was on the West Coast, so I didn't get a chance to take my work to see them for work in the beginning. So I have to say that the fact that there were a lot of black-owned businesses and publications and ad agencies, that was a plus for me, because I could go to them as a black female and show them my work, and if they liked it, they hired me, and obviously they did. I was not just hired by black companies. There seemed to be, if I could, as I look back, there seemed to be always a connection of a black person in that company, however. And that's not always the case. That wasn't always the case, because I would meet graphic designers and art directors, independent art directors that were not black, but we just struck up a friendship and a conversation and a comfortableness with each other that they hired me. Sometimes I would meet them in various places socially, and we'd talk about what each of us did for a living, and then that would strike up a conversation, well, come and bring me your work. So some of those smaller companies and magazines and jobs that I got from those other than African Americans came as a result of just being in the right place at the right time. However, the African American magazines and ad agencies did help. And like I said before, as far as working for the Broadway department store, I had a friend who was becoming an art director at the same time I was learning photography. And she got a big job at the Broadway department store. And she became the head creative director. So once she became the head creative director, she called me and said, I got some work for you. And so she would tell her junior art directors to send the clothes to me and send the products to me. So a lot of the times that I got really nice, what we used to call bread and butter accounts, was because somebody on the inside had met me somewhere and knew me. And a lot of the times they were African Americans themselves. When I got the Toyota account with Dancer Fitzgerald Sample, I met a young lady that was an assistant producer on the commercials. And I met her in the grocery store. I think it was at a time when I was kind of low on money, and I decided I was going to sell some prints. So I was at the grocery store putting these flyers out. And, you know, to come to wherever, I think I lived on Cloverdale at the time, Cloverdale near San Vicente. And I would put my pictures up all in the living room and dining room. And she was in line or something, and I think I turned to talk to her, and she says, yeah, I'll come over there, I'll come and see what you have, you know. And then when she came by and saw me at work, she said, you know what, I think you could probably do some of this work that my company does. I work for Doyle Day, Dancer Fitzgerald Sample, and we have the Toyota account, and they need photographers to shoot on the Toyota commercials. So you would shoot stills of each scene, and they would use those stills to make the storyboards that would go out to the local Toyota dealers so they could put their tagline on the commercials. So I did that probably, that was one of my main clients for probably 2, 3, 4 years. The other commercial accounts that I got as clients was Carnation, which eventually became Nestle. I worked with Ken Bentley, who was the vice president of maybe diversity, or I'm not sure. Anyway, I worked with Ken Bentley at Nestle. He published a book every year on African Americans for children in high school and junior high and high, you know, for students. The other accounts that I had, other than the Broadway department store at that time, were a Nestle, which was Carnation before it became Nestle. I worked with, like I said, Dancer Fitzgerald Sample. I worked with UNCF, Lou Rawls Parade of Stars. They were one of my main clients for 15 years. I did that every year. I shot the celebrities that were on the show for the TV Guide. They went in, to promote the show. For Nestle and Ken Bentley, who was the person that hired me to do most of the work, I shot. I guess you'd say they were mentors. He would wrote a book for high school and junior high students for encouragement to, know that there were African Americans out there that did all kinds of work and had many different types of careers. So I shot a lot of the people that would be in that book. And there were a number of people, like authors and sports figures and executives and that. And then some of the other companies were Johnson Product, Worlds of Curls, which I don't think exists anymore, but that was a hair care product. Emporium Capua out of San Francisco was one of my main clients for a long time. Ernie Barnes, the painter, was actually my very first consistent client in the very early 70s. He needed the photographer to photograph his original artwork because at that time he wanted to put together a lithographic portfolio of his original paintings that people could buy and frame and use in their house without buying the originals. So I worked with him probably 10, 12 years off and on. And we actually became really good friends. There was a time in my career, probably after I had been in the business 20 years, maybe 20 plus years, where I felt like I don't know if I can continue doing this at the same pace and level because of the digital age had begun. You know, digital cameras and the internet and so many different ways to produce images that I hadn't taught myself that yet, you know. So that was a rough time. I went back to PCC and took Photoshop and Illustrator, and Quark Express was the design platform then. I took those classes just to catch up with how to be on the computer and use a computer for photography. So that was kind of exciting. I liked that. I digitally manipulated a lot of old images, learning how to use the filters and the different parts of Photoshop that you have to learn. I haven't completely kept up with it at this point, but I know it well enough to do what I need to do to touch up things and scan and all of that stuff. And at that same time, I decided that I would go back to grad school. And I went to Cal State Long Beach and took some classes for about a year to work towards a master's. But I just wasn't really, I don't think I picked up Cal State Long Beach because they had a great photography department, and Todd Gray was the chair, I think, at the time, and they had a good reputation for, you know, photography department. But I wasn't trained so much in the fine art area of photography, so I found it difficult to have a voice, you know, in terms of the types of images or projects that you would want to use for your master's thesis. So I was a little frustrated during that time. Had I known what I know now, I would have used my commercial background and the types of work I did to come up with a master's thesis around that versus trying to do it some other way that I wasn't familiar with. So I would have done that a little differently. And because of that frustration, and because, you know, I wasn't making a lot of money at the time, and I had a house note at this point, and I had a son, I was married, you know, there were a lot of things that needed to be taken care of. So I decided to flip houses. And it was fabulous. I did that from 2003 to about 2008 when the market kind of crashed, when, you know, things just went crazy. But I just transferred all my skills from being a commercial photographer and running a studio to being a house flipper. I had my plumbers, my electricians, my carpenters, my roofers. I had a real estate agent that I worked with, a couple of them. And I had equity in my house, and I went and got loans, and I flipped about 3 or 4 houses, maybe, let's see, 3 for sure in Pasadena, 1 right after the other. Both of them were for sale by owner, so it made it easy for me to get them. And then I bought one that was down in LA that I added a room onto and a bathroom. And yeah, so I guess I'm an entrepreneur underneath and a photographer. A photographer entrepreneur. I don't know how you would, I guess being a photographer is an entrepreneur. You know, I've always liked abstract photography, and even abstract paintings and whatever else I'm looking at, either they're paintings or abstract art, period. So recently, well, within the last 5, 6, maybe even 10 years, but for sure 5, I've been creating abstracts from reality. There's a lot of apps and a lot of filters and a lot of, I guess it's Painter by Corel. So I would take some of my older images or find images, what they call appropriate images that I thought had a lot of nice color in them or just had nice shapes. And I have a series of abstract art that are from photographs. And I've had two or three people to buy those. So I'm kind of happy about that. I'm real happy about that. I'd like to use that. I would like for that to become part of my new collection. When I was in graduate school, I learned how to print. I guess you had a printmaking class. So I would take some of my photography and I can't remember the process at this moment, but it would, you'd print it out onto paper. And I have some nice images of that time period too. So I have to say that the next thing is going to be large, 20 by 30, 30 by 50, whatever those sizes are of abstract, printed out some kind of way. I don't really know yet. Maybe they won't all be that large, but that's kind of where I'm at now. I have a lot of great memories of photographing iconic African Americans and others. They're not all just African Americans. I got to photograph Frank Sinatra one time at the UNCF telethon. He came in unexpectedly, I believe, and I don't know if he did a PSA for the UNCF or not, but we were like, we're actually photographing Frank Sinatra. So that was kind of nice. But I photographed Miles and Gordon Parks and Maya Angelou and Ernie Barnes and Suzanne Jackson and Betty Saar, Charles White, Fred Eversley, Bill Pazot. I've photographed a number of very highly regarded artists back in the day, and that was very memorable. And some of the people that I've ended up photographing became friends of mine. In 1974, I was chosen to go to Jamaica for the Jamaican Film Festival. So at that time, a lot of the actors in that era were just kind of getting started and had done some of their first movies. So they were all on that trip. So I got to meet Paula Kelly, Bernie Casey, Brock Peters, Rosalind Cash, many others. Calvin Lockhart was on that trip, and Gloria Hendry. We all became friends from that trip because we were there for 2 weeks and we were staying in villas. And so that was a very memorable time in terms of the iconic actors of that day. And I became friends with many of them. As I think back on my career as a photographer, I feel like I succeeded in what I set out to do. I mean, I wanted to do advertising and commercial photography. I wanted to do ads. I wanted to create the kind of business consistency that would help me have a normal life, buy houses and send your kids to school and all those things that you do as a working person. So I think that I'm pretty happy with what I was able to accomplish as a photographer, and I'm happy with where it took me. I think I accomplished pretty much the goals that I had at the time. My goal now is to actually tell this story and have a larger exhibit of all of the work that I did, starting from the beginning. I mean, even with that little small camera, I think it's a pretty interesting story. And of course, there's so many more images that I have in my archive that tells the full story. So I could probably have 100+ images in a show to do a complete retrospective. So I'd like to do that and write a book about it, or at least a book, accompanying book with the images. So if anything, that would be the next, that would be that and creating the abstract images and having a complete retrospective would probably be my next goal. Being at the stage that I am now in life, my advice to anyone is to be passionate about what it is that they are, that makes them excited, and if it can lead to a career, go for it. To always follow your own mind, Don't be afraid to try something new, because even though I've been a photographer, I've done a lot of things in between to make sure that the bills got paid, you know. So don't be afraid to take a little bit of a side trip if you need to make sure that you can come back to where your passion is. Just don't give up, I guess is what I would say. And get to know yourself, you know. That has a lot to do with getting anywhere in life. I don't care whether you're an artist or a CEO, you know. Take time to get to know who you are and be kind to people, like Ellen DeGeneres says.